Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of Aster-yee-ah. For those that celebrate, hope you had a frightful Halloween. Since the last episode, I had not changed anything, but I did spend a lot of time planning for future developments of Aster-yee-ah, and this episode is obviously going to feature one of them. In the last episode, the focus was on the sustainment of ecology of this island, pretty much an episode about the preservation of nature. I want to further expand on this idea and mend it together with human infrastructure. This is going to be a very large development, as it involves a lot of land terraforming. The idea is a city-wide animal highway crossing. We do have many animal crossings around the world going over and under our highways, and their purpose is to reduce wildlife vehicle collisions and stop the endangerment of animals, which some species have already been driven to near extinction because of roadkill, like the ocelot with only 80 individuals left in the United States, according to the U.S. Federal Highway Administration. Every year there are millions of animals killed in road collisions, and with approximately 200 people dying each year. But I'm not trying to say that one number is more of a massacre than the other, or humans are less significant. But what's rather more important for discussion is the prevention of having these numbers increase on both sides of the fence, and decreasing these numbers as much as possible. All life is sacred, as they say. Obviously, we're the most dominant species on this planet, but our recklessness makes us the #1 predator on the planet. According to the Kenai Fjords National Park of Alaska, the #1 predator of moose is the car. Since the 1970s, the construction of wildlife highway crossings has skyrocketed, but that raised the question, do these even work? Like I said in the last episode, highways causes fragmentations of ecosystems, splitting populations and habitats, and this causes an island effect, or an isolation of genes, where animals are either unwilling or unable to cross the highway and interact with others on the other side. Animals are like our nomadic ancestors that move wherever the food goes. If bears and moose were to suddenly develop agriculture, they would most likely settle down somewhere instead of roaming around all the time like we did. Despite these animal crossings being relatively small, in research studies they found that they do in fact manage to get the idea across. No pun intended. Now I was curious, how would an animal know where to go to cross the highway with one of these overpasses or underpasses? Well, I probably can't answer that question directly of how they do it, but I know that they just managed to do it somehow. Like what Jeff Goldblum said in the 1993 film Jurassic Park.
The history of evolution has taught us that life will not be contained. Life breaks free, it expands to new territories, and it crashes through barriers painfully, maybe even dangerously, but, well, there it is. There it is.
You're implying that a group composed entirely of female animals will breed?
No, I'm simply saying that life finds a way.
A 3-year study by the Montana State University conducted at one of the most extensive yet successful eco-passages in North America, the Trans-Canada Highway. This goes through the country, including through Canada's Banff National Park, the only national park with a highway running through it in North America. In the early 1980s, there were hundreds of wildlife vehicle collisions a year at the park. But once the animal crossings were erected, it was reported that there was an 80 to 90% decrease in collisions wherever these crossings were present. Yet without proof that these crossings were vital to the surrounding wildlife, engineers were reluctant to keep building them as they were expensive. Montana State University's studies involved in collecting over 10,000 bear hair samples, which they obtained by placing barbed wire at the entrance of these crossings. Whenever a bear passed by, a wire would snag a bit of its fur. They also set up wire and motion sensing cameras around trees wherever bears would use them as scratching posts. In addition, they placed piles of wood 8.5 miles or 13.6 kilometers away from the crossing, laced with cow blood and fish emulation to grab their attention. That way they were able to track the movement of the bears, and found that brown grizzly bears and other open space roaming animals like elk tend to use the overpasses more often, and animals that spend most of their time in shaded forest environments like cougars and black bears prefer the underpasses. Over the course of the study, wildlife collisions were on the downfall, and animals crossing the bridges became more frequent. While as good as this sounds, these crossings are not the complete solution, as animals require large open spaces. And that's why I want to do something opposite of an animal crossing over a highway, but rather our highways going under these wildlife highways. This is going to involve large spaces in the city rather than just strictly using the rivers for the animals to move around. These animal highways will cut through all parts of the city, connecting to natural wonders like mountains and other things. We already have a natural mountain or a hill here on this landmass next to Astergea already. Now this does conflict with one of my city planning goals, and that is density. But we need some exceptions if we're going to create a city that is ecologically aware. And also, it's the future, so why build outwards when you can build up or even down? I think these wide animal highways will add a much needed relief for citizens to escape from the dense concrete jungle we call home. Because this animal highway will not just be dedicated to wildlife, but also features nature trails along the path. But it's not just about the effect on citizens, but again, the environment, as urban zones tend to make large heat island effects. Because of the city infrastructure, causes the ground temperature to rise and become drier. With these added animal highways providing more trees to add microclimates, cooling the atmosphere of the city and provoking more rain by retaining more moisture, it will counteract the heat island effect. Now comes the question, how are we going to make an animal highway around our human infrastructure and make it look appropriate rather than just a line of trees cutting through the cityscape? We'll have a gradient of random appendages of buildings coming from the main neighborhoods like Astergea, in the forms of straightforward shapes like triangles and rhombuses, and in conjunction we have parks and social centers along these highways. We don't want too much heavy infrastructure lying beside the animal highway, as noise and light pollution would affect the area. And while we cannot stop 100% of the noise and light pollution, but what I did to counteract some of the noise pollution was taking inspiration from a recent design that I saw at Amsterdam Schiphol Airport by Waldeinsamkeit. He took his inspiration from the 17th century CHLADNI patterns and historical farming techniques. This design is meant to deflect sound waves and dampening them, much like how we see in sound rooms with the walls fitted with triangle hedges and such. I tried to fit this design along the animal highway to help with noise pollution coming from the neighborhoods. But to be honest, as creative as this does have an unpleasant look from the perspective of a citizen walking by or up in his room of a tall apartment. I tried downsizing and minimizing the areas of these soundproofing zones so we don't have such a massive scarring effect on the aesthetics of the environment. I believe that planning from an aerial perspective is great, but what's just as important is how it looks from the ground, from the perspective of a man or woman, child or senior walking by, because it is there where we live, not in the sky. As for the parks and social centers earlier, I'm going to save that for another episode, as that also requires an abundance of my time to properly integrate the cityscape with the animal highway. With all these trees now in the city, we potentially have another issue in our hands: wildfires. Wildfires can be caused by various things from humans to natural causes like heat and lightning. This massive area of huge flammability pose a risk to surrounding urban zones. Yet again, we cannot stop 100% of these issues. However, what we can do to assess the issue is to provide selective cutting of trees in the forest. I take this inspiration from a solution provided for the California wildfire crisis that is happening recently. Today, the United States spends a large sum of money to fight these fires, and it is a good cause, but it's not a thoroughly thought out plan. What is happening is that these forests are no longer going about their natural cycle of life and death. We allow these trees to live and accumulate, adding to a greater flammability risk and therefore more intense and deadly fires. Wildfires are a natural part of life for forest ecosystems, and a type of renewal, you can say. Like I said in the last episode about flooding, nature doesn't get damaged. Well, unless it's by humans, of course. But trees in the forest have adapted to drop their seeds when a wildfire happens. It provides an opportunity to revitalize the generation of trees, which is what makes the wildfire a regenerative force. You can see it like a phoenix. When a phoenix dies, it turns into ashes, but from its ashes it is born anew. Wildfires also renews the soil chemistry by adding nutrients back into the ground, mostly with its carbon, which is part of the carbon cycle, an integral part for life on Earth. With the soil chemistry now revitalized, this also affects in the rejuvenation of the watershed, like I mentioned in episode 3 when making the water treatment facility. A watershed, as defined by John Wesley Powell, a scientist geographer, that area of land, a bounded hydrological system, within which all living things are inextricably linked by their common water course, and where, as humans settled, simple logic demanded that they become part of a community. A watershed is a source of a region's water supply, and the life that dwells within it depends on this. When a wildfire happens, this changes the soil chemistry to become more fertile, which replenishes the food supply for animals living in rivers and other bodies of water, including the restoration of streamside vegetation, which are the riparian zones, if you remember, that catches excess nutrients that are caused by runoff. With the recent crisis happening on the west coast over wildfires, this wasn't the first major catastrophe to wake us up. We had learned from this before, in 1988, at the Yellowstone Park, where there were several disastrously massive wildfires after 50 years of fire suppression. Rather than fighting fires, let nature handle it. But we can help to our cause of lessening the severity of these fires by cutting a certain amount of trees down in a forest so that it would not fuel a large-scale fire. This is also the future, so if anything crazy happens, we have drones and pyrophobic barriers ready to prevent fires from creeping towards our urban zones. It isn't about annihilation, but rather containment and prevention. Now that's enough of the actual thoughts in adding this wildlife highway. Now let's talk about the name, Waldeinsamkeit. Sadly, I don't know a lot of languages, but I've always been fascinated by linguistics, like how languages evolve over time from one original language, and then it becomes like several different dialects, or even how a language can disintegrate and become several different new languages. I think language itself, like the vocabulary and the expressions with them, says a lot about cultures and lifestyles of people. Like when I named the city center Yugen, which is from Japanese. Japanese has a lot of words that pertains to feelings and nature, so you can see that in Japanese culture, harmony of feelings between people and nature plays an important role in their culture. With Aster-yee-ah, I want to name the districts of the city after unique and often untranslatable words from languages of the world. This is the human capital after all, and I want it to encompass our humanity, putting heavy emphasis into the realization in the beauty of mankind, the rainbow of diversity of different types of people and cultures of the world that makes this world so entertaining. Call me a humanist, but in this fictional world of Aster-yee-ah, whatever has plagued the past to bring about this situation of living on this island, I don't want the citizens to reflect negatively on the past over our recklessness, narrow-mindedness, and the selfishness of our kind, but rather what made us stand out. Waldeinsamkeit in German literally means solitude in the forest, but actually refers to the feeling of being alone in the forest. The feeling of strolling through the woods and feeling connected with nature. I find it a very beautiful word, and indeed a beautiful feeling that I had experienced while backpacking through Japan. And maybe this word has its origins to Germanic tribes that dwelled in the forests of ancient Europe, where paganism was the dominant religion of the society, or even the recognition that Europe does indeed have some of the most beautiful forests that is enough to leave you speechless. But that's just my guess, not sure if it's a fact, so for my German fans, please let me know. Also, in choosing this word with my personal bias, in addition to the Japanese language, that I love the German language. Sadly though, I did not continue with the language after I took 1 year of it in high school, but it continues to intrigue me today. I want to find a word that is appropriate for this animal highway, and well, since it also serves as a path and living space for animals, we also have nature trails along this highway for humans to enjoy and experience Waldeinsamkeit. As I said earlier, this animal highway will go all around the whole city and touching natural wonders like mountains. We already have a large mound of a mountain or a hill here originally on the map, and I want to transform it into a mountain with a dense forest and nature trails. Taking from my experience in Japan, I want to create a temple hilltop, namely a pagoda. But there is more to this. In Aster-yee-ah, I'm going to create several mountain hiking destinations across the island. We already have several natural mountains on this map, but I want to brush up on these as I move along with the development of this city. But for this particular mound in this episode, I'm going to place down a temple like those that I had experienced in Kyoto and Hiroshima of Japan. I used a Korean pagoda that I got from the workshop and named the area Hongikgan, one of the words or phrases that is central to the Korean spirit and culture and means for the welfare of humanity. The origin of this phrase or word goes back to 2333 BCE when Korea's first dynasty had begun. It was a quote from a Korean myth called Dangun, which told of a god that descended down to earth to rule mankind. And one day a bear and a tiger pleaded to the god to make them humans. Therefore the god gave them some tests which they must first pass in order to become human. Succeeding, the bear became a beautiful woman, while the tiger ran away, failing to complete his test. The bear then prayed every night, asking the god for a child, and the original plan of the god was that to make the tiger marry the bear, but because the tiger had disappeared, the god ended up marrying the bear, and had a baby named Dangun, the first king of the Gojo-san dynasty, which he created 8 laws to govern mankind, and the quote Hongikgan, which is still used today as the official motto of South Korea. This motto was meant to be that the relationship between the king and its people must be peaceful and caring, and also that mankind within itself and nature should be harmonious, living for the sake of others. What made me chose to do this in placing down a classical type of building is that, again, I want Aster-yee-ah to encompass all parts of our humanity, as much cultures as I can fit in here. Though I'm not going to try to make it some kind of Disney Epcot tourist trap type of scenario, but rather than historical replicas that are meant to be integrated into the city and serve as social centers. This is the future, yes, but I don't want to create something so strictly futuristic where it's just another cookie-cutter metropolis with tall buildings and fancy infrastructure. Already the eco-friendliness is quite a stretch compared to our traditional ideas or even our constructed notions of a future city guided by popular culture. I think that the city should at least hold some monuments as relics of the past, relics from all cultures that makes us who we are, telling the story of the world that once was, the story of our ancestors and sharing their identity and ideas. Then bundle it together to share our combined history, our beauty, and our art. Aster-yee-ah is the culmination of our history, so it shouldn't just be about the stargazing, but also the appreciation for what we had and the celebration of our unity. Now let's briefly go over what I've just created. I added 2 additional cells to the community farms, and over here I laid a placeholder for an upcoming neighborhood that I called Zvezda, which means star in Russian, and I got that name from another module of the International Space Station, which provides the life support systems and living quarters of the station for the astronauts. I will expand outward in upcoming episodes for this neighborhood and start up on new neighborhoods as well, but I think that we should first finish the parks and terraforming around Astergea. Okay, so this is where this episode will end, and I would like to say thank you once again in joining me in Aster-yee-ah, and I'd also like to thank my patrons like Andy, who recently contributed to my Patreon. I really appreciate the help, and again, for those who like my work and want to support me, you can check out my Patreon page down in the description box below. I'll end on this. People have speculated if I was making some kind of utopian city where there must be a polar opposite to this innocence, or some kind of new world order thing. Well, I don't want to strictly think in black and white, and I'm not going to try and label it either by a word. What I will say is that in this fictional universe, we can say that we've reached a period in our cultural and social evolution where things are just so commonplace that people become accepting and tolerant of each other, accepting of religions, ideologies, people, and etc. I mean, if we were to look back 1,000 years ago from now, society has viewed things drastically different from our views today. And today, I think this is the crossroads in our social evolution of when we start moving down that path towards Aster-yee-ah. However, this crossroads is a test of whether we can walk down that path or not. Because of the world today increasing in globalization by trade, travel, the internet, and etc., we can already see tensions already rising by the mixings of people and culture. But at the same time, we see more enlightenment and tolerance, and that is why I highly encourage you that if you have the chance, study abroad. Because it's more than just about traveling and education. It's for the evolution of mankind. You can say that our country's borders are like highways that splits forests in half. Go out there and see the world, laugh with new people, indulge in tasty meals and treats of other taste palettes, learn a new language, experience and learn new perspectives on life from different lifestyles and cultures. And most importantly, you may find yourself. We spend a lot of time looking at the ground of where we live in, but never about the land of which other people live in.